And this is an interesting article. It says that the owner of Politico, as well as Telegraph, is claiming that journalists need to support Israel or resign. And so, normal Americans, from what I can see, and Westerners in general, they already made up their minds on Israel, right? And so the people that are pro-Israel, they say, well, I mean, this is based. Like, of course, finally someone talking common sense. We got a righteous person here, ending up all of this nonsense. While the people that are against Israel, they're basically like, look at this, censorship, horrible censorship. While people from Eastern Europe, like myself, I'm looking at this article and I'm wondering, well, if he feels this way about Israel, what about the other things? Like, how many other opinions does he have, right? So, like, is this what journalism looks like? You have the person at the top, the one that decides who gets to be hired or fired at the company, and he basically says, on this issue, this is how you're going to start speaking from now on. If anyone speaks differently, you get fired. And unfortunately, the people like me, right, from Eastern Europe, have already noticed what journalists are doing. It's not about trying to speak the truth. It's not about trying to bring the news. It's pretty much like the guy in charge, the one that holds the purse, basically deciding how every single journalist should and shouldn't behave. Now, it's interesting because if you actually speak with journalists, they will say, well, hold on a little bit. Like, I'm not bought. Like, every time I go there and I write about things that I want to write about. Well, the reality is it's true, right? But the thing is, like, they don't hire people that disagree with the editorial. Like, for example, when I worked at the Lotus Eaters, I got paid. I didn't work there, sorry. I got commissioned. Got commissioned by the Lotus Eaters. Sargon commissioned me because he knew about my political takes. So, like, yes, I never got censored, but I have no disillusion that if I was like a far-left activist or a communist, Sargon would still commission me, right? So it's pretty much how it works. And so this brings the question, it's like, if this is public knowledge, if most people understand, why is it that people put so much trust in journalists? Like, why do we even talk about Politico? Why do we even talk about Telegraph? And here's the actual reality, right? It's not that people trust about journalists, but they trust about the journalism as a function. Journalists are the modern clergy. They're the modern priesthood. Basically, what they do is that they interpret events, right? It's not that we need journalists to figure out what is happening in the world, because we already have social media, we have Facebook, we have YouTube, we have these things that journalists also use in order to figure out events. What people use journalists is to interpret the events. They want to know, like, okay, how do we phrase this, right? Like, how do we put this into words that people understand? What slogans do we use? And more importantly, the journalists as a class, they decide which sins matter, decide which person is respectable, decide which scandals are real. And of course, they also decide what language polite society is allowed to use. And this is why they actually talk like a priest, if you think about it, right? Like things like democracy dies in darkness, speaking truth to power, holding power accountable. Even if it actually doesn't make sense in some situations, like, democracy dies in darkness and the European Union is not democratic. They don't say shit about that, right? The reality is that these are slogans. They're taken with faith by the people that like the journalist class. Now, the question is, what happens when the clergy is being exposed? Like, what happens when you actually know that the journalist is writing based on what he is allowed to write? Well, the reality is more complex. You see, if you expected that journalists as a class will go away even when people know that what's published is horseshit, you would be wrong. People still trust the journalist class for the several reasons. The first one is habit, right? Like, your parents grew up with journalists. You read newspapers when you were young. And chances are, like, even if you disagree with the newspapers now, you still read them because you're curious to see what they wrote. And so it is a matter of habit that happens. The second one is fear of the alternative. This is a very important one that people overlook. It's like, okay, so let's say we get rid of journalists altogether, right? What replaces them? Because many individuals, like, they think if you get rid of a problem, that the world remains as it is. It's like, no. What replaces them is going to be probably rage farmers, partisan influencers, foreign propaganda, right? People who research means that they watched a couple of TikTok videos. And so, while I think that's pretty fucking based, other people would be horrified, right? Especially like people that are paid by institutions, people who belong to institutions. And so, even if they know that journalists are hacks, they are terrified of what would replace them. Finally, it's also the status signal, right? Respecting mainstream journalists, especially for actors and other people, is often a way to signal that you're educated, that you're moderate, that you're in tune, you're with the pro-democracy crowd. Humans like to belong. And in order to belong to something, you need a narrative, right? Like the journalists managed to reach the biggest number of people. And so the narrative is easy to tune into. Obviously, in our modern society, you don't have just one narrative like we used to have with, like, for example, the Catholic Church, right? Like, that set the narrative for the entire kingdom. And then maybe, like, you would have had a struggle between two noble houses, and it's like, which house do you side with? Now there's, like, several narratives, right? Like, you have the left-wing narrative, the right-wing narrative, maybe a couple of other narratives that civilized people adhere to. And you're basically with your faction and with your clique. And then you have the fringe narrative, the extremist narratives, the one that the mainstream doesn't want to touch. And so the status signaling basically means that you're part of the moderate narratives. You're a prestigious person. Like, you can get hired by your own group. People aren't ashamed to associate themselves with you, right? And so this is the role that journalists create. And in order for you to know what the role is, you have to read the papers. And of course, it's also that the real journalism does exist. Like, every now and then, you may have an actual journalist that does write about something important. He does crack open a story. He does expose some abuses. And what he does is he actually lends prestige to the organization that hired him. Like, for example, Tucker Carlson, back when he was at Fox News, he was generating a lot of prestige for Fox News as a station. And he was doing, like, legitimate journalism. And so, to answer the question, like, why does the CEO come out in public and is very partisan and is basically saying, yeah, anyone that's against Israel gets fired. Like, I don't care if you have a point or not. You either support it, right? So not even be neutral. You have to support it or you get fired. And so, like, why do people still think that Politico matters? Well, it's because, again, the habit, right? The fear of the alternative, the fact that Politico does make, occasionally, acts of real journalism, and the status signaling, right? Like, if you talk about what Politico talks about, you're safe. Like, no HR is going to have beef with you. Nobody is going to punish you for saying the shit that Politico says. In fact, if you're against Politico, then you're in trouble. And this is why journalism will still exist. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you in the comment section. Take care.